Thank you very much for attending. My name is Randy Chapman, Microsoft MVP, Office Apps and Services, specializing in Teams. My background is kind of Teams and UC and Skype for Business, Link, and that kind of stuff before that. As my contact details, I blog at UC Status and I Twitter at Randy Chapman. My session today is on Microsoft Teams Voice, and I just kind of renamed it as a voice made easy, and hopefully you'll see through the presentation that it in fact can be very, very easy. A little agenda for you. So I'm going to talk about the voice options in Teams. I'm going to talk about direct routing specifically. So if you were hoping to see some magic on how to configure voice for calling plans, this is the wrong session for you. Everything is going to be focused on direct routing. I'm going to talk about what you need and the configuration steps. I'm going to talk about auto attendants and call queues and phone system, and again the configuration steps, and then a little wrap up and summary. So the voice options in Teams. So you'll know that the buzzword or the kind of description by Microsoft and others is that Teams is the hub for teamwork. Really, it's the hub for everything in Office 365. The phone system or PBX element of Microsoft Teams is called phone system. It was called PSTN calling or something before, or no, it was called something else that I can't remember what it was called, but don't worry about that. It's called phone system now. There's two options to get PSTN dial tone or telephony into Teams. The first is Microsoft calling plans, and that's what was launched first. Microsoft had some grandiose plans to become a global telco. They realized just how difficult it is to become a global telco. I heard a joke once that it would be easier to become an international arms dealer than to become a global telco. So consequently, calling plans are only available as of now in 11 countries, either from Microsoft directly or through third-party service providers. The other option is direct routing or direct routing, depending on how you want to pronounce that. Effectively, it's bring your own telephony or bring your own trunk into Teams. And there's a few ways that can be delivered. And if I move on to the next slide, what I've kind of shown here is that it's my diagram that I did for a blog post quite a while back about what direct routing is. So on the left, you'll see the Teams user is connected to the Teams phone system service, everything over the internet, of course. And at some point, somewhere, is a session border controller, SBC. That SBC can be physical or virtual. It can be hosted on the customer's network, in their data center, in their broom cupboard. We've got a customer that actually has an SBC running on an Intel NUC that's in a drawer in an office in a far off reach, because that's the way they need it for a very small satellite office with execs, and it's connected to local SIP trunks. You can get SBCs that run in Azure, for instance, or other cloud service providers. You can also not have an SBC if you wanted to. So there are service providers out there that can actually host and manage the SBC using multi-tenanting, or actually just host an SBC for you in a different data center. What the SBC does, effectively, it's the man in the middle. It's the kind of glue between the carrier or telco, which is below that, and an external caller. But also you can bridge Teams, not just with the telco or caller, but also with your existing telephony equipment. So for instance, if you've got a call center that's on your Cisco or your Mitel or your Avaya, for instance, and that's been there forever and ever and ever, and it's stable and it works, or you've got requirements for things like call recording or other compliance things, that can quite happily stay there. And then the SBC is the bridge, kind of the glue that connects the three worlds together. So what happens in this case is when an external caller calls in, the number, it hits the telco or carrier. That goes to wherever the number lives, which might be an ISDN or SIP trunk. That's plugged into an SBC. Then the SBC has some routing logic that says if it's a Teams call, send it this way, down another SIP trunk, or if it's a PBX call, send it that way. This can also manage things like cross-system calling. So a person that's homed on the PBX, phoning somebody that's in Teams, that will go through the SBC as the kind of mediator in between. And there's other escalation things where you can do things like conference in an external PSTN number, and all the magic can happen on the SBC. There are some things that still happen on Teams itself, but the SBC is vitally important. SBCs are available from a few different qualified providers. And I would check the documentation, which changes kind of infrequently, but frequently enough. But the likes of, and I'll say this alphabetically, AnyNode, Audio Codes, and Ribbon are the kind of three favorites. But there's also Ferrari and Acme Packet and different things out there as well. So what do you need for to make direct routing work? So you need Teams licensing. So Teams licensing is actually included in every Office 365 SKU. That includes the business plans, but also the enterprise plans, so E1, E3, E5, but also the academic and government SKUs as well, so the A1, G1, etc. However, to get phone system, you need an add-on, and it's called the phone system add-on. It's just added on to existing licensing. Right now, you can add it on to, I've got add-on to E1/E1, but it's actually E1/E3. But phone system is included with the E5 license. And that's needed for every user that's going to use telephony, whether they want to make a call or not. It's also required for any users that needs the to receive a call from an Auto Attendant Call Queue. You also need the session border controller. As I said, it can be in your broom cupboard or with a service provider, wherever you want it to be. You need a PSTN line, so that could be, if it's a physical SBC or gateway, that could be an ISDN line or E1 to E1, that kind of thing. Even analog lines will work, or it could just work with a SIP trunk from any number of providers. You need the Teams clients, of course, and as it says here, it's available for Windows and Mac desktop. There's specific Teams desk phones from the likes of Audio Codes, Yealink, and soon to be Poly, Android or iOS, and kind of smartphones and tablets, and then also some browser clients as well. And of course, because Teams is a cloud service, it relies on a stable internet connection. And the recommendation is that the internet connection is as close to the users as humanly possible, for a very good reason, because Microsoft have got a very expansive network that they like to kind of control and help with relays and a bunch of other services that live across it, called the Content Delivery Network. So getting on the internet is vitally important. And what else do you need? So to make phone system work, you need a real verified domain. So the on Microsoft domains won't work for this. So you'll need your own domain. So you add that to the Office 365 portal, verify it using a TXT record or something like that. That proves that you're the owner, and then you can have that as a UPN or if you like, SIP address or Teams address for the users. You'll need a public DNS record for your session border controller. So if you've got a domain, you'll have a DNS host. So something like sbc.domain.com. If you've got multiple SBCs, you can have SBC 1, 2, 3. You can have SBC named after a site or a region. It's really up to you. Which brings me on to the public certificate. So the SSL certificate, it works with the wildcard. So if you've got multiple SBCs, it's best not to have a certificate that is tied to one specific name. So like sbc.domain.com. what happens if you change the SPC or you want to add in resiliency. You'll need to add more sands to the certificate. But in this case, just use a wildcard. You'll need some SIP signaling and firewall ports. So I'm not going to read through the table there, but you can kind of see this is all publicly available on the Microsoft documentation. What traffic is needed in and out. You'll need the Skype Online PowerShell module. So that's something you download from the interwebs and install, and then you can connect to it. I'll show you how to connect to it in a little bit. To set up all the telephony stuff and anything else in Teams for that matter, you'll need an account with sufficient rights. So if you're a global admin, for instance, you've got everything you need, but there are specific RBAC roles or roles. It was called the Teams admin role, but I checked yesterday and it's now called something else. But there's 3 or 4 different levels. There's like a Teams help desk and a Teams this and Teams that. But there's like a service manager, team service manager role that has everything, and that gives you access to not only Teams and all the telephony stuff, but everything else that's included with Teams. Skype for Business Online, which is kind of part of the infrastructure this is all relying on, and all the commandlets that are there, and a few aspects of AD and Intune and a few other things besides. So what are the configuration steps for direct routing? First, you need to connect to Online PowerShell. So little eye chart down there, but this is a little glimpse into my world and how I like to connect. So if you connect to the same tenant over and over again, if you're managing your own Teams infrastructure, this might be one for you. So as you can see from the script, the read host will prompt you for your password, and then what that does is it saves it to a secure string into a file. It's not saving the password in plain text, it's actually saving it in a block of encrypted text about that big. That would be nigh impossible to crack. And then the lower half just collects all the variables and then connects you to a new session, imports that session. And the reason I do it this way is because if you've ever managed Teams or Skype for Business Online for that matter, you connect to the Skype Online PowerShell module, there's a timeout, and it's I don't know exactly how long it is, 30, 40 minutes, something like that. So if you're running command, you'll go make a coffee, you'll come back, you'll run the next command, and it'll prompt for credentials, which don't work. So you need to kind of connect to a new session and import that session and that sort of thing. So if you run this, or actually save it as a PS1 file, open it in ISE or whatever your kind of thing of choice is, then you can just press the play button to rerun this. Once you've saved the password, however, what you can do is you can comment out that read host line, and then all you need to do is play the bottom half from authenticate and connect. And that'll just connect a new session, and then you can run your next command and carry on. Next thing you need to do is pair your SBC with phone system and get another little eye chart thing. So new CS Online PSTN gateway, the FQDN for the DNS record that you created for your SBC, which points at your SBC, a SIP signaling port, which is up to you. You can restrict the number of concurrent sessions. So in this case, it's 10. But if you've got multiple users, you can have more. I would say you can leave it blank and there's no limit. But however, I would always set a limit based on the number of trunks that you have or channels that you have. And there's some other things, call history. The enabled true is really critical. You can actually add a PSTN gateway that's disabled. You might just have that as a hot spare or something. And then the last line is media bypass, making it true. Again, that's optional. And then once you've run it, this is the kind of result that you've got. 6 months ago, whatever it was, 8 months ago, when direct routing was first launched, that list below, from identity all the way down to bypass mode was much, much shorter. There were only 6, maybe 7 different parameters, and there were a lot of them were different. You know, you could do things like codec priority, so you can prioritize, you know, silk over, you know, something else, for instance. All that's gone, and there's a lot more stuff in there. So I can't tell you much about any of the, you know, translation rule stuff, but, you know, some of it's roadmap, but there's a lot of really cool stuff coming. You can see things like, you know, E911 there as well. But for now, just can kind of configure the basics. And you configure SBC. So as I said, there's plenty of vendors out there that do SBCs. I'm not going to show you how to do the SBC. I'd need a much longer session. Although if you know any node, for instance, that's the SBC that I'm running in my lab. This is a screenshot of the kind of, once you've configured it, this tells you that you have that connection there. When Microsoft is connecting to, or your SBC is connecting to Microsoft, it's actually connecting to, if you can see the target URI and the transport connections, there's 3, you know, SIP, SIP2, and SIP3. Those are 3 different regional transport hubs from teams that your SBC is connected to at any one time. The SIP dot will be the one that's closest to you in your region. So if you're in North America, for instance, it'll connect to the transport hub in North America. SIP2 will be the European one, and SIP3 will be the APAC one. So what happens is if the North American one goes down, you reconnect to the European one, and if both of the first 2 go down, which is highly unlikely, you'll reconnect to the APAC one. It just means that your SBC will always be online with Teams and always available. One thing that happens is the SBC and or Teams sends what's called option packets to make sure that the SBC is alive. So you can see that it says there, you know, 1636 options packets sent and 1636 received. I think the screenshot was taken shortly after it was actually made live. That number will increase quite a lot over time. If you get any failed packets, you know, 1 or 2 here and there, probably isn't the end of the world, but it might indicate an internet blip or something like that. If you're just receiving failed, then it's not connecting correctly. Could be a firewall issue, you know, DNS, a bunch of other things. So then you configure your Microsoft phone system voice, and I kind of said in quotes there, stuff. There's lots of stuff to configure, but we'll go through that. So the first thing is what's called PSTN usages. As it says there, the PSTN usages, you know, if you know your link in Skype from the old days, it's the link between a voice policy and a voice route. And all 3 of those things determine, you know, what a user can, you know, where a user can call. So whether they can call a local call or a national, international, you can restrict their calling so they can only call local calls, for instance. And then it also determines which SBC or which route the call will take when they do place that call to a local, national, and international. And you can have a different SBC or a different route for each of those things. Maybe you have a different carrier agreement, which gives you better least cost routing or something for international calls. Or maybe it's just international calls to a specific country that you call a lot. You've negotiated a rate, so you can have a separate SBC for that if you wanted to. Next is a voice route. So you'll need voice routes for each PSTN usage, and there's a couple of ways to do it. This is the complicated way. So you can have a voice route for each call class. So in this case, I've got mobile, toll-free, Medway, which is the area that I live in, which is the kind of the local region, national, so anything that's kind of in your domestic region, but not considered a local call. And then there's the service. So in this case, it's like emergency services and that sort of thing. And this can be as granular as you want. You can create as many voice routes as you want for your PSTN usage. As you can see, it's, you know, new CS Online voice route, and that ties, you know, as a container, the UK-mobile, and then it ties to a PSTN usage of the same name, and then it actually uses the online PSTN gateway list. In this case, I've only got one, but if you've got multiple, for instance, for resiliency, you could have, sbc.ucstatus.com, comma, and then your next one, your third one, fourth one, whatever you want. And then there's the number pattern, which is all the kind of normalization translation stuff. And then a description, which is optional, but obviously always recommended to help desk or anybody else troubleshoot things. You can also use the easy way. In this case, it's basically just using a wildcard, the quote, dot quote, to send any type of call just to that SBC. And then it's a voice route just called, in my case, it's UK because that's where I happen to live. Next is the voice routing policy. So this command just isn't just for the voice routing policy. This is also for enabling the users for direct routing. So again, three different lines here. So the first one, what I've done here is, it's a little cheat for you. I've got a variable for UK underscore only, and what I'm doing is getting all the PSTN usages with UK dash in the name, and then tying them to a specific variable, and then applying them to a voice routing policy. And then the next line down is I'm granting that voice routing policy to a specific user. You can also, roll that out to multiple users, sort of a get CS online user, and then pipe it, or you can use CSV files, or be really creative and do things like, sort of OUs or security groups and things like that if you wanted to do a controlled rollout. And then the last one, very, very important, is to make sure that the user is online. So it says, actually that's not in that command. It's just making sure that their Skype account is homed in Skype Online and not Skype on-prem, but also that they're enterprise voice enabled, they're hosted voicemail enabled, and then they have an on-prem line URI. So the on-prem line URI is a field that is only pertinent to somebody that has the phone system license, is homed online, and then this is a number that lives with your SIP provider or your ISDN provider. So this is just a free text field, the tail colon plus, E164 format, and you're setting a phone number and enabling them for voice. If you don't do that and grant the voice policy, the user will never get a dial pad, and they'll never be able to make a call. They might be able to receive a call, but they won't be able to make one. So vitally important you do these things. Next on the agenda, auto attendants and call queues. So an auto attendant is effectively a virtual receptionist, and it routes calls to groups of users based on the input. Sometimes called an IVR, interactive voice response. So sort of say or press 1, for instance, for sales. The way I usually describe it to customers is press 1 for this, 2 for that, 3 for the other. But I've used the sales, support, and customer service because that kind of goes into the demos, the demo phase for this. You can route an auto attendant call to an operator. So you might have a specific front of house operator that directs calls to add that kind of personal touch. You can also route to a specific person in your organization, or you can go to what's called a call queue. A call queue is, if you're into telephony, it's a hunt group. And it's a way of grouping users into specific departments and then using that for routing, overflows, that sort of thing. So in this example, if the user presses 1, it goes to the sales call queue, it queues and waits for somebody to be available. But you can also do things like, you can control how the calls ring. So if you don't have a very busy department, for instance, you can have it just ring everybody and anybody can answer. You can do in list order and a round robin, longest idle, and things are coming, and there's more improvements on the way. So what do you need for an auto attendant and call queue? So it's built into the phone system add-on license in Teams. It's just something that's there for telephony. But you must make sure that the user, so if you add a user to a distribution list or an Office 365 group that is a target for a call queue, for instance, only the users that have the phone system license will be able to receive calls. You can put as many users as you want in there, but you won't be able to route calls to users unless they have that license. They also need an upgrade policy that allows them to take calls in teams. So in this example, it's teams only. Islands mode, I'd always recommend that, that you steer clear of islands mode where possible. And the coexistence policies that kind of do, a bit of Skype, bit of Teams, won't allow you to do Teams calling anyway, because it leaves Teams free for meetings and collaboration, but voice and IM presence and that sort of thing stays in Skype. So you won't want one of the middle modes. So how do you set them up? Actually fairly straightforward. So here's the configuration steps. First thing you need is what's called a resource account. Don't get confused with the way what they used to have in Exchange, which was called a resource account, which might be a room or equipment mailbox. This is a specific type of account that's used only for auto attendance call queues. So when you create a resource account, you need to determine or specify whether it's going to be used for an auto attendant or call queue. And that's done by a field called the application ID. At the moment, it's just a long string. To me, it might make more sense and be a little bit easier if you could specify a resource account by using a little flag. What I'll also say as well is most of this demonstration is going to be done in PowerShell. However, you can create a resource account in the Teams Admin Center. If you're not a PowerShell-y type person and you want to do it in a web page, then it's absolutely fine. And when you do create that resource account, it's just a drop-down list where you choose whether it's an auto attendant or call queue. You can also change it. So maybe today it's for an auto attendant. Next week you want it to be for a call queue to swap numbers around. You can also change it as well, as long as there's no dependencies on it. What the Teams Admin Center is doing is effectively just executing the PowerShell commands, and I'm going to show you. But if you're a PowerShell command type person, then yeah, it's just as easy to construct it and then press go and it's done. So onto the command. So new CS Online application instance, give it a user principal name. So in this case, I've constructed it as a RA for resource account, AA for auto attendant, and then the descriptor for the auto attendant. So in this case, it's the main number, and then it's the domain. A display name, so it could be, I guess, as long as you want within reason. So I've just said resource account, main number, auto attendant. And then, of course, the application ID to tie it to that. And then when you run it, down below, you'll see the results. There's a run space ID, object ID, tenant ID, the user principal name that you've got there, of course, the application ID and your display name. You can see that the phone number is blank. The next step is creating, this is actually just the resource accounts for your call queues. And again, it's just the different application ID. So if you've got a main number auto attendant, for instance, you might want a call queue for the different departments. So the press 1 for this, 2 for that, 3 for the other. In my case, it's sales, support, and customer service. So I've done that there. Next thing you need to do is license a resource account. If you want to set a phone number for the resource account, that'll come in a minute, but you need to actually have a valid license for the resource account. Initially, when this was launched, Microsoft had, they didn't have this specific license that I'm going to talk about now. You needed an E1 with a phone system, which was, I guess, pretty cost prohibitive if you've got a lot of groups or resource account requirements for a telephone number to call a call queue, for instance. So they came up with a better way. It's a free license that you can obtain from the normal license store in the Office 365 portal, and it's called the Phone System Virtual User. There are some math to do with regards to how many of these virtual user licenses you're entitled to, which is available on my blog or on the Microsoft documentation. But you can obtain a bunch of numbers. I think I obtained something like 25 because that was what I was allowed to in my own personal tenant. And then you can license the accounts as you need them. You only need to license accounts that need a phone number. I'll say that as well. So if you've got a call queue, for instance, that is only accessible when you call the auto attendant, for instance, and you press 1 and it goes to that call queue doesn't need a number. However, if you want a phone number on that call queue so that somebody can ring it directly from the outside, then you need a license. Adding a license is pretty easy, just a little bit of PowerShell, as I said, or you can assign it in the Teams admin center. So in my case, what I've done is I've collected some variables. The first thing you need to do is specify a location. I didn't notice that until a few days ago when I was writing this deck, actually. When I first set the license for it, I don't think I needed to specify a location, or maybe I did it in the Teams admin center, but you need a calling location effectively to make it work. Then you assign the license. So what I've done is, the variables are the location and the UPN of the user, and then the license down there is, again, collecting the variable for colon phone system underscore virtual user, and then applying it to the user. To set the phone number, what you need to do is wait a few minutes. If you've ever tried to configure anything in Teams, there's a little replication delay on certain things. Sometimes it's minutes, and I've heard cases where the phone number thing, when it was first announced and launched, it could be many minutes. It could be many days, sometimes even a couple of weeks. If it is more than a couple of days, you need to raise a case with Microsoft. There might be a blocker or something there that's preventing the number from reaching the business admin center. But effectively, you wait, go make a cup of tea, cup of coffee, cup of beer, gin, whatever's your drink of choice. Then you come back, and then you run the command to assign an on-prem phone number to your online application instance or your resource account. And as you can see, once you've run the command for the first time, the phone number field is blank, so it doesn't show you that the number has been set. However, if you run the get CS online application instance, after a minute or so, you can see the phone number that you've assigned to the resource account will actually show up. Next thing you need to do is create your call flows. So now that you have a resource account and a phone number, you can create some auto attendants and call queues. And this is done in the Teams admin center. However, it is also possible to do it in PowerShell. I haven't included the PowerShell for auto attendants and call queues because that would be a 3-hour session on its own just for doing that. It's hugely complicated, hugely satisfying if you actually get it right. And at some point, I'll get around to actually launching the blog post that explains it. I'm not sure how many people will read it, but there you go. So the first thing for your call flows is, for your call queues in particular, is you'll need some groups to group the agents that are going to take calls for those call queues. You can create an Office 365 group or a distribution list. Either will work. And then, so if you've got somebody that can manage, the users in and out of a distribution list, that can manage the agents that are assigned to your call queue, for instance. I would recommend doing it as an Office 365 group. I can't tell you exactly why right now, but trust me, please. But the distribution list will work fine. The method to do that, you can obviously do it in PowerShell, but I just showed a couple of screenshots for how to create a group. That drop-down list at the top for the type that says Office 365, that is a group, or it can be distribution list, which is in the drop-down list. You give it a name, a UPN, descriptor if you want to. You can make it private or public, and that adds the group. And then the next screen, you can do, add members. You can add as many members as you want. The order is really important here as well, because if you play, if you actually route the calls to users in list order, for instance, or something like that, or a round robin type of scenario, the order at which you want users to receive those calls will be determined by the order of the members in this list. There's no way to kind of alphabetize this and do it that way. It's done in a different way. Right, I've only got a few minutes left, but luckily I've got some padding time for questions at the end. The next bit is a demo. Right. You go to the voice tab and call queues. I would recommend creating the call queues first. You give the call queue a name. You add your resource account. And then these are really basic call queues that I'm going to create. I'm kind of gloss over the kind of greeting, music on hold things and everything else. Then you add your agents, which is, in this case, it's your group or your distribution list. You press add, then scroll down and press save. And that creates your first one. And then lather, rinse, repeat. You create the next, in my case, 2. You can add the accounts, resource account. And as you can see below that, you got routing methods like, attendant routing, serial routing, round robin. And there's some timeout call handling for overflows and things, but again, I'm keeping it quite basic in this for the sake of time. This is the last one. The reason I create the call queues first is so that when you create your auto attendant, you have something to point it at. So rather than creating the auto attendant and then going, oh, okay, I'll save that, and then I'll go back, create the call queues and go back to the auto attendant, just do it this way. I think that's why they're listed in that order under the voice thing. Do it. Now you create your auto attendant. Again, video I made earlier. You go to auto attendant, press add, give it a name. You can, of course, specify an operator if you want to. It's optional. You set the time zone, the language there, some call flows. So you can say no greeting. You can play an audio file, which you have to browse to, or you can type in a greeting and use text to speech. I always like to do the greeting kind of a generic kind of thank you for calling company name. And then what you can do is to route the call, you can set up your play prompts. It's quite nice to be able to kind of edit the 2 independently. So press 1 for sales, 2 for support, 3 for customer service. You can also add in the words, kind of say the name, say the word sales to be routed to sales. Now you set up your menu options. So 1 for to route to a voice app, and a voice app is either an auto attendant or call queue. In this case, it's the call queue. Then press 2 again to a voice app, and then to your support call queue or resource account actually, and then your third again to a voice app, to the customer service resource account, which links to the call queue of the same name. And what I've done here as well is I've added in, the voice commands. So, that's called the sales department. So sales, next one is support. And the third one is customer service. So that when a user calls, for instance, they can say the names as well. And then next. Now you determine your business hours. So you might have a different business hours requirement for different days. And you can add multiple business hours to each day. So if you have a lunch break, for instance, you can say, we're open from 9 to 12, and then from 1 to something else. And then the business hours determine the types of routing. So you can have in-hours call flows. And you can do things like greetings and more redirect options. Again, I'm trying to keep it quite simple here in the interest of time. You can specify holidays, so Christmas or whatever it is that you celebrate in your local country. And then at the last step is you add the resource account. And that's the resource account with the phone number in this case that links to this auto attendant. Then you press submit, and then you'll see the auto attendant is in the list. When these were created in the first place, there was obviously a disconnect between specifying the number for the resource account and then being able to do the call flow. Microsoft is working very hard on making that process a lot smoother and simpler. The last one I created, I was able to make calls to it and answer calls for the call queue within a matter of minutes. So it should be a lot better. And if it isn't for you, again, it raises a support case if you need to. So a little wrap up, kind of what I showed you. So I showed you the voice options for Teams, described what direct routing is and what you need to make it work and how to configure it. And then I talked about auto attendants, call queues, again, what you need, and then how to configure them. And with that, I remind you who I am and what I'm about, and how to get hold of me if you need to. And I say thank you very much for watching. If you have any feedback on this or any other sessions, there's a short link and a QR code. Please do leave feedback. We like to kind of see how we're doing, as individual presenters, but also, for the user group in general, and for future, festivals and Oktoberfests of some description. So again, thank you very much for watching. I've gone 4 minutes over, but I did join 2 minutes late. If there's any questions, please put them in the chat, or if you want to unmute and ask a question if you'd like to for the remaining kind of 15 minutes.